Ready to get going?
Yeah.
I am Nancy Poff. I'm the coordinator for the Richard and Bowman Center for Local History, and I really hope you enjoy this little talk. I've been doing this research for several months, and I'm really excited to share it with you folks. I also didn't get a lot of sleep last night, so hopefully it all makes some kind of sense. All right, so I thought I'd start off. I'm not going to cover the entire history of education or lack thereof for African Americans, but let's just cover some of the highlights. In the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, after the Civil War, you finally have a recognition of the need for everyone to be educated. Of course, different counties decided whether or not they actually wanted to go by those new laws. But within Charles City, you did have the beginnings of, and New Kent too, you have the beginnings of schools that are created, one-room schools. And there would be a white school and a black school. And just as an FYI, some of the records that I'm showing do use the terminology of the time, such as colored, which, just as a heads up. I thought I'd mention that. Now, let's look at an example. Not going to cover the whole history. Let's look at one example from 1872. So if we're looking at the numbers for the superintendent's reports, this is what you see. Total white students in Charles City, 594. Total African American students, 1,031. So that's a lot. That's a lot of people, right, who want to be educated. And both white and black students are in that school, or an iteration of that school, with one teacher. And I was trying to find a correlate in my mind, and the only thing I could come up with, because, I don't have any brothers and sisters. I am an only child, but I am a child of the 70s, and I grew up with the Brady Bunch. So I was thinking, this is kind of like if you had the Brady Bunch and a whole bunch of other Brady Bunches, up to like 100 children, that were all just in this one room and learning from this one person. Mm-hmm. That's what it'd be like. This, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years old, you're all in that one room. That's what the school was like. Total white schools in the county, 6. Total black schools, 7. Let's look at the problem with this slide. And it's this last statistic, right? 12 white teachers and 1 colored teacher? That seems a little wrong. Now, interestingly, in this same book, one of the questions that the superintendents are supposed to answer is, how accurate are your records? And you probably won't be surprised to know that the superintendent, who was in charge of both New Kent and Charles City County at the time, said, well, in some of the counties, the clerks, they're not very good at taking records. That is literally what he said. He's blaming the clerks for bad record keeping. Okay. Let's assume there's a few more than 1, but probably not as many as 12 in 1872. All right. Now, is this? Okay, there we go. The only picture I could find of Martha Banks is this one that you see here, not the greatest quality, because it's from a school photo, from her college, 1896 photo. She's one of a whole bunch of people. Now, she was a teacher for a very long period of time at Parish Hill. And her daughter, Wilnette Carter Davis, did a master's thesis, which was published in 1952, which I would have the wonderful joy to be able to look at recently. It's an onion paper. Anybody remember? Yeah, it's terrible. It makes terrible copies, right? She interviewed her mother a few years before her mother died. And one of the things that Martha Davis said was that Parish Hill in 1900, when she was just starting out teaching, had an enrollment of 110 students. Now, here's the interesting thing to me. If you look up in the Fisk database, which is where the Rosenwald records are, if you look up Rosenwald schools, what you get is this picture here. How many people have been on Highway 5 and have seen Parish Hill? Like driven down Highway 5?
Yes.
Not it, right? Definitely not it. Here's the interesting possibility. If this is the school that had 110 students, then is that teacher Martha Davis? Could be. We never know for sure, but it is a strong possibility, since the Fisk database tells us that that is what Parish Hill looks like. Now, in 1922, John Sweet stated that an additional room was needed for another school called Barnett's, which is in Charles City. As said, he was making his presentation to the school board, right? And he was trying to explain why they need more money, more funds, more facilities. And Barnett School at the time had 90 to 100 children in one room with one teacher. Okay, it's the same thing, same statistic that Martha's telling us. They're very overcrowded. That's the picture of what the schools look like. So that is why you get to this overwhelming need that everyone and their brother knew at the time. The community, the African American community, the educators, the white community, because the white schools were also overcrowded. Admittedly, they had more teachers, more facilities, but there's still those one-room schools. Everybody knew that you needed better schools, right? Especially Booker T. Washington. So that's where you get this coming together of the idea of Booker T. Washington and the money of Rosenwald, who was very well known for his philanthropy. And the Rosenwald Fund comes into existence. The initial beginnings of that are in 1912. Now, dates become very important for my story that I'm going to tell you, so forgive me if I get a little date heavy in this next section. The purpose is obviously to bring better education to African Americans in the South of this program, but it's also in both of their minds, I think, important to have this ethos of self-reliance and self-improvement through education. That was also very important. That was the reason for being educated. Now this school, okay, let's look at this date. This is one of the first Rosenwald schools. The first 6, I believe, were all in Alabama. Now, this is in 1913. The program starts in 1912 because Rosenwald gives himself a heck of a birthday present. He says, it's my 50th birthday, I'm going to give away a lot of money. And then admittedly, it was at the very end of the article, I'm going to give money to these people and YMCA and all this other stuff. And down at the bottom, the very bottom, you get this little bit with Booker T. Washington Schools, $25,000. And that's how you get the first schools funded. And then you see across the nation articles. All the newspapers are talking about how Rosenwald is giving away money for education. This is the message that people are getting. And the African American community is immediately starting to send out letters. And I went and looked at the Booker T. Washington collection, and one of the things, now no one from Charles City, as far as I can tell, sent a letter. I did not find one from Charles City or New Kent, because I would have let you know if we did. But there were places in Virginia that were sending letters, and this is one of those letters that was sent to Booker T. Washington. And so look at the date, though, 1914, right? So almost immediately, birthday program announcement, 1912, first Alabama schools, 1913. 1914, people in Virginia are already writing Rosenwald and Washington and saying, I hear you have a program. How about sharing some of that money? Because we are in deep need. And this is one of those letters. Just goes into detail about why they need it and what they'd like to do. And invariably at this time, it was right before Washington's death, his response had to be almost like a form letter response. It was like he sent the same one to all of these folks saying, we're not ready to do this in Virginia, it's not happening, I'm sorry, but we'll keep you in mind. It's essentially what he had to write back, and then of course he dies. So how does it work? Well, you would think that it meant that Rosenwald was just writing huge checks. Not really. Rosenwald would provide partial funds, no more than half the cost, and that had to be matched by the African American community and the school board, the public funds, right? So it was a mix of those three. And in this example, one of our Rosenwald schools, Wayside, you can see here, I know that, I apologize for that tiny font, I can barely read it myself, but the green is what the board provided. And that's $3,400. Rosenwald provided $800. Is that an 8? Yeah, $800. And then the African American community provided $600 in this example. And the numbers that you'll see for the different schools are all over the place. So here's the timeline. 1912, there's the agreement to start the project. 1914, Julius Rosenwald agrees to fund a larger program for schools. And so he's committing to this on a broader scale. 1915, architectural drawings are starting to be published for communities around the South to be able to follow. Actual school plans for how to do this and how to do this in your own community. 1917 is when the Rosenwald Fund officially starts as a program. And the offices at that time in 1917 are out of the Tuskegee Institute. 1920 is when it moves to Nashville, and it becomes, it moves out of Tuskegee essentially at that time. And then also in 1920, I again apologize for these details, but it becomes important to what I'm going to talk about here in a second, is the plans of Samuel L. Smith. He puts out specific architectural plans. Now, here's the problem, and I came up with this, I had this mystery that I haven't really solved, and I'm going to explain to you guys. When you look up the DHR, the Department of Historic Resources report for Rosenwald schools, what it will tell you is that Rosenwald schools in Virginia didn't happen until 1917. Which is part of the problems that I was having. I was like, 1917, but our Rosenwald school was built in 1915. That's a problem. One of our schools. So essentially, if you read their report on Rosenwald schools, it'll tell you there was two types of, there was these two phases. You have this first phase with the 1917 to 1920 when it was based out of Tuskegee, and then you have the 1920 to 1932 when it was based out of Nashville and it moved away from Tuskegee. So those are the two phases. And essentially the two schools that I'm going to finish up talking about, one of them falls into this first one, and the other one falls into the second category. So the early Tuskegee schools, this is a quote from the book, one of the books that was published in 1915 that everybody had access to, that everybody could follow in their own communities. We have heard a great deal in the past of the one-room school. Such a school consisted usually of one bare room without cloakrooms, porch, or space for industrial work. This school must go and in its place must come the one teacher school, housed in a building equipped with cloakrooms, library, workroom, in addition to the class proper. All right, so that's the idea. You're still going to have a relatively small footprint, but it's not going to be just a one-room, one-teacher school. It is going to be a one-teacher school that has multiple rooms. Now, in this example, you have a classroom, and you have the the extra industrial room type area. Then you have a a cloakroom and a library and all of this. So something similar to that is going on in one of our schools. Now this is that second subtype, that second phase, what the architectural drawing looks like. Probably everybody in this room has seen this school. If you've ever driven by any Rosenwald school, this is very, very common. Parish Hill looks exactly like this one right here. So this is the two-teacher school that becomes popular. All right, and that's just a quick graphic. I wanted to, I think it's a cool map because it shows all across the South, all of those dark areas are where these schools were built. So it's really an amazing thing. All right, so let's finish up by looking at the 6 schools that are in Charles City. The first 3 that I'm going to show you are unfortunately no longer around. The Kamajas is something that was built around 1926-27. That's its budget year, but it is unfortunately no longer standing. Same thing with Union Baptist School. They actually have, interestingly, very similar designs. If you look at the outline, what Kamajas looks like, and then what Union School looks like. They're a very similar plan, obviously. And also built basically at the same time. They had this budget year for Union Baptist is 1926, 1927. Now, the Ruthville High School, I really wish it was still around. It was huge. It's so much money. It was this really important, central location that everybody was sent to. In fact, one of the Mount Zion students today talk about, moving from being at Mount Zion to going to Ruthville. So I really wish that this was still around, but it's not. And look at the budget. It was $20,600 budget to build this school. So this was a 6-teacher type of school, which is why you have all of that. And we do have in our collection where I got this scan from, a yearbook from 1950-something, a couple of yearbooks in that 50s, 60s era for Ruthville High School. All right, so Wayside, and I do apologize, I'm not going to focus on Wayside a lot either. It is still standing, and it's, as you can see, it follows that plan that I showed you of that subtype 2 school, Samuel Smith architectural design, and I would love to tell you more about it, but my focus has been on these last 2 schools because I've been preparing to nominate them to the Historic Register. So I do apologize for skipping over the Wayside. All right, so let's get to Mount Zion. How am I doing?
Yeah.
Good? Okay. Now this is what Mount Zion looks like maybe in the what do you think, dude? 50s? 50?
Oh, 1970s.
The interesting thing is that the photo in, this may actually be from Willett Carter's thesis. The photo from the mid-50s that's in her thesis looks pretty much exactly like it does today. I mean, the building the building has deteriorated, but it's just exactly the same footprint. And what's been changed has been on the inside. One of the rooms was converted to a kitchen at one point. But otherwise, it looks remarkably, it's so obvious it's the same building. Now, the name addressing the issue of the name of the school was the first thing that I tackled. The documents call it Home Mission Society. The DHR database, the Department of Historic Resources, calls it the Home Mission Society. And in fact, the DHR did not have it as a Rosenwald school because of this issue with the names. They didn't realize that the documents which are talk about Rosenwald schools at Fisk University and all other places, call it MICA. But the community today calls it Mount Zion. And if you look at the term reports, which I'm going to show you in a second, it calls it Public School Number 4. So it's all of these things at once. Now, this is the trustees are still in place. It is still owned by the same people, the descendants and community, as you see in this deed right here. It's still owned by the same people for the whole century, except for a period of time in the middle when it was given over to the Chickahominy School District to be a school. So it says, the Home Mission Society, for the sum of $15, is buying land from Mary Brown, and the parcel is called Brown's Shop. Now, one of the things that I haven't been able to go any further with is the idea of whether or not Brown's Shop had a building on it, and that immediately after, in 1899 when they got the property, obviously they're getting it because they want to build a school. That's the Home Mission Societies tended to, that was like one of their main purposes, is to build these educational facilities, right? Did they have a building on the property and start using it as a school immediately? I don't know. Now here is the deed from 1915. And this is where they are saying the Chickahominy District Board can buy it or lease it essentially for $1 and use it. Sandy Point near Mount Zion Church is where the location of the property is. The property has a schoolhouse on it. Okay, so we know from this 1915 deed that there is a schoolhouse on the property. But okay, keep in mind the first part of the conversation, Rosenwald funds didn't kick in Virginia until 1917. So I still haven't resolved this issue completely in my mind. Right now, in bringing together and writing the text for the historic nomination, I'm just going to have to go with, there was a building in 1915, and that's a picture from Wilnett Carter's thesis. There was a building in 1915, and they got Rosenwald funds, $1,000 is together what they spent to either refurbish it. Maybe they built an entirely new building. At this point, I just don't know why you have a building that's there in 1915, possibly built in 1915, and then 2 years later, you're able to get $1,000 towards it. But this is Wilnett Carter. This is from the yearbook that I mentioned, and thinking of names. Her master's thesis from 1952 calls this, which the DHR knows as the Home Mission Society, MICA. And that's what it was known as, near as I can tell, for at least since its inception as a school for several years after that. And then somehow over the course of the 20th century it transitioned into becoming Mount Zion. Well, I mean, we know why, because it's the Mount Zion community that's put the money into it and it owns it and all of that, but it just takes a while for it to transition, and then just this calling it Micah just completely drops off at the end of the 20th century. So, the other thing that I found, in addition to her thesis calling it Micah, the school Micah, I found in the school board minutes what you see here. So the school board says in 1942, Mount Zion or Micah School. So that's another link, and we know that we're all talking about the same thing. So here are some term reports. Love term reports, some of my favorite records. I'm not kidding. Now, so here's an interesting one that says from 1916, and it is for public school number 4, so it's talking about Mount Zion, and it says it was built for $400, right? So that whatever building they had on that deed in 1915 was something that she's saying was built in 1915 for $400. And we know from the Rosenwald records that they put $1,000 into the Rosenwald version of this school. Now here's an interesting one from 1921 where it's called Zion number 4. So kind of combining a couple of those. And then someone just sort of crosses out number 4 and then writes Micah, although I don't know. I'm always a little bit more distrustful when it's written over like that, because I don't know when someone came back later and crossed it out and wrote it over. So here's the budget for Micah. We have the community with $300, the local African American community. You have the board of supervisors doing $450. So the public, and then Rosenwald kicking in the least, $250 is what Rosenwald kicked in. Now, another direction of research that I've looked into is maps, and this is a very bad close-up of the 1918 map, which USGS map, which I actually read was surveyed in 1917. Now here's the thing, I would love to be excited about the words Micah School right here, but the white schools and the black schools have a tendency to be named the exact same thing. So there's white Micah School, there's a black Micah School. Is this the Micah School mentioned which one is it? Now, I think, Judy, you told me you were thinking it was the
It's
black.
on the wrong side of the road no matter which one it is. That's all I can say.
But I'm nursing a pet theory, which is why I blew up this incredibly bad whatever. So if we think about the symbol for a school, it's a square. There we go. It is a square with a flag on it. And if we think about the symbol for a church, it's a square with a cross on it. Now, if I squint my eyes and use my imagination, what I see on this map is a square with a flag right here, and a square with a cross right here. So if this is Mount Zion, then this would be the correct location for Micah School today. So I'm nursing, my pet theory is that they put the white school on the map, and that the African American school was already there, but they didn't label it in 1917 when this map was surveyed. So this is I believe at the time they said 9 of the 10 students who are still with us who remember being at Micah. And we had a lovely, there was not water. The water was on a spring on the property next door, and one of the chores was that you had to go get the water from the property next door and bring it to the school. Now, the interior of the building, and incidentally, if anyone wants to be involved, please let me know. I can get you in touch with Jackie Wallace, who is right there, I think. No, right there. That's her. I can get you in touch with her. They're just like trying to figure out how to save the property. You know, that's what they're trying to do. On the inside, I didn't take a lot of pictures because I was really busy coughing a lot. It's very moldy, but basically this room that you see here would have been the school room, and that's what these ladies remembered when they were there. It was still the school room in this part of the building. The one that I didn't have a picture of was the kitchen, which I believe was an industrial room originally. And then this is the cookroom. Now, moving on to Parish Hill. Parish Hill was built during that subtype 2, but almost immediately when the school, when they moved to Nashville and they started publishing these plans, the people at Parish Hill were on it, and they built this in 1920, according to the term records. So it was just immediately when the program moved and expanded, and they started emphasizing these 2-teacher community schools, they built one at Parish Hill. So it's north-facing, follows the designs of Samuel L. Smith, looks exactly like Wayside, and and many others. So this is maybe a mid-century photo. It's not what it looks like today. Here's the budget for Parish Hill. We have $3,400 coming from the board, and then the local community kicked in, what does that say, 600? I'll look at the screen. 600, and I think that says 800 from Rosenwald. So anyway, you can see that the public put in a lot of money to help build the school, and so did the local African American community. And then Rosenwald, does his bit too. Whoops. There we go. Okay, so back to my favorite records, term reports. I love this term report. It's a little blurry, but what it is from 1917, and it's for Parish Hill. And Martha Davis, the teacher I mentioned before, from the quote, in 1917, she's still teaching at Parish Hill, 17 years later, right? And she tells us in this, right there, that they are raising money for a new school, and they have raised $62.45 so far. So it's just little nuggets like that just make your day. And also, this document tells us it's still a one-room school in 1917. Now, this one is also Martha Davis, 1918, and she still says it is it's in poor condition, one room, and things are broken. So you get wonderful little details about what the building was like before they built the new school. Broken desks.
How many students did you have in that class, in that one?
The 1900 quote was 110. So I don't know whether or not all of the students reflected in the report are necessarily, that's an interesting question. I haven't actually counted up all of the names, but I'm going to do it now. past that. Because I didn't think, but I could count all of the names that are on the reports and see how many that is.
So the reason why I asked you that is because if there was 110, and it was a one room, one teacher.
Yep.
Did they split it up so that you had some kids coming Monday, Tuesday?
There are
Thursday?
reports by Jean's teachers, Jean's supervisors, Jean's teachers, that I have not been able to have access to that may help answer that question. So there are some reports out there somewhere that might tell us some of those details, but right now I'm just not sure.
Okay. I was curious.
1919, still a one-room school in very bad condition. This is an interesting one from the 1919. One of the questions is, do you have a flag? And she says, basically no, but we're planning on one for the new school, is essentially what she's telling us here. And then the 1920 report. Two things about the 1920 report. There's more than one, because it's now a two-teacher school. They've opened a new building. So we have still Miss Davis who's teaching, but she has a fellow teacher in the form of Miss Mamie Cotton, who also fills out her own report. And there's a little bit of a disagreement between the two, I think, between how many rooms there are. Depends on if you count a cloakroom as a room. It's either 3 or 5 on the reports generally that they fill out when they have to answer that question. But the basic idea is the term reports confirm the new building as 1920. And not only that, as, like they generally fill out these reports like maybe around April or so. So it's like relatively early in the year, I think. But anyway, yes.
All right.
Okay, good. Yeah,
And
thank
then
you.
should I pop it up again after you're done, or are you going to come back to your slides?
I do want to come back to this.
Okay, so I'll just get ready as soon as
So
you're
while
ready.
that's loading, is there any questions? I can
There you
answer?
go. Good idea.
No questions?
The eligibility of the schools that you have from the standpoint of certification of the teachers, was that taken into consideration?
The what?
Certification of the teachers that
Well,
you have.
They all had, they all were graduates of, they had to be graduates, right, Judy?
They got teaching certificates
Yeah.
after 18 months.
Was that for black as well as the white?
I think the.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And where did they get, and what school, or university or college, did they get this, how did they get the certification?
Virginia State, I think, was one of the first.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually do have some names of graduates. That's one of the documents I remember reading, is names of graduates who went to Virginia. Yes.
Does all teachers have to be graduates of colleges now in order to teach?
Today?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, you have to be certified. You can't just be a graduate. You have to go through the certification process. Unless you get, some states have provisional certification where you're teaching, but you're also taking classes to become certified at the same time. Yeah. Okay.
Did they take into consideration of the Indians from the standpoint of Charles City during that time?
The Indians had some area school at one point. They were doing their own education.
Well,
right?
actually, what Charles City was doing was using school funds for white schools to fund the Samaria Indian School. For all the time period that it was funded as a separate school.
So the Fairfield Foundation, lovely group, if you're interested in archaeology, they do really wonderful stuff and working with the public and all kinds of people. So I recommend looking up their website. They came out for free, brought their expensive drone equipment, and did a flyby around Parish Hill. And so that's what I wanted to show you. So this is on the web, anybody can load it, and gives you this model.
Oh, it's cool.
The back was a little bit iffy because the closer the tree line is, the harder it is to do the drilling. But, yeah, so. But it's, okay, there we go. I'm just gonna let that play. This is what I wanted to show you guys, the interior of Parish Hill. And, you know, just to wrap things up, Parish Hill is now owned by the county. The county has bought it. And it is my intention to nominate both Parish Hill and Mount Zion to the historic, to the national, what am I saying?
National Register.
National Register of Historic Places, thank you. You know, the condition of Parish Hill is phenomenally good. I will say that the little bits of black that are on the floorboard is probably poop. I did see a bat in one of the photos that I took of the closet. It was completely dark, and I just did like this, and the flash went everywhere. And so later, after I got home, I saw a bat. So I do know there's bat guano in there. But other than that, the floorboards are good. It's really pretty remarkable, I think.
So is it being designated as a historical site?
Well,
It's just there.
it's already a historic site.
Oh, okay.
But it's, putting it on the National Register, to be honest, doesn't really do anything. It gives it recognition as a historic site, but it doesn't mean you can't do something to the property. So the county is looking at restoration plans. Mount Zion is in touch just this last few days. They've been able to get in touch with someone who's a retired architect and who may help them do a study, an architectural study of the site and develop some kind of plan. But basically, they're going to be looking into possibly filling out grants, and restoration costs a lot of money, so it's.
Yeah, right. Is that the only one that's still standing, or?
We have
Wayside is
three
also
still standing.
Okay.
And I just didn't talk a lot about Wayside because I haven't been able to get in contact with the owners. And so I kind of don't know as much about Wayside. But it is also privately owned. All right, so that's it.